Welcome. Today, we're diving into a really deep-rooted issue in America, the criminalization of Black masculinity. We're going to look at how perception, policy, and history have all come together to create a staggering reality for millions of people.
So let's just start with a number that really stops you in your tracks. 7 out of 10. That's the number of Black men who drop out of high school who end up in prison by the time they're in their mid-30s. It's a statistic that shows this incredibly powerful and tragic pipeline from the classroom straight to the cell.
And this reality leads so many into what the author, Ta-Nehisi Coates, calls the gray wastes of the American prison system. It's a phrase that just perfectly captures that vast, desolate landscape of mass incarceration.
So you have to ask, how did these gray wastes get so big? Well, the system just exploded during the imprisonment boom of the 80s and 90s. The bipartisan war on drugs ended up disproportionately targeting a whole generation of Black men who were just coming of age at that exact moment.
And the scale of this is it's immense. The result? 1 in 4 Black men born since the late 1970s have been incarcerated by their mid-30s. I mean, just think about that for a second. A quarter of an entire generation.
So what's really at the root of these numbers? Well, it often starts long before anyone is ever arrested. It begins with a specific and very deeply ingrained perception, what's known as the threat stereotype.
And listen, this threat stereotype isn't just some vague feeling. You can actually measure it. Studies show this stark difference in how men are perceived just based on their race. Get this, 1 in 3 white Americans view many or almost all Black men as violent. But when you ask them the same question about white men, that number plummets to just 1 in 10. That's not a small gap, that's a chasm.
And political scientists Ismail White and Kareem McConaughey argue that this points to a really unique kind of stigma. It's not just about race, it's about the intersection of race and gender. Black men are often discriminated against specifically because they are Black men.
You know, this stereotype has real, tangible consequences every single day. Sociological research shows that middle-class Black men will often change their behavior, like being less physically active in mostly white areas, in this constant, exhausting effort to manage how other people see them and just try to avoid being seen as a threat.
Okay, so this bias, it doesn't just stay in people's minds. Let's take a look at how it translates directly into systemic disadvantages, within our justice and economic systems, creating this really clear path from bias to bars.
It makes sense, right? Because they are seen as more threatening. Black men are more likely to be stopped by the police, more likely to be frisked, more likely to be arrested, and then ultimately more likely to be convicted. Every single one of those steps is another point of disproportionate contact with law enforcement.
And the difference in sentencing is just as stark. Black men are 9 times more likely to be put in prison for a drug offense than white men. And this is despite data showing that both groups use drugs at very similar rates. 9 times. It's an incredible number.
And even after someone has served their time, this bias keeps following them. It creates these enormous barriers in the job market, which is, a critical step for anyone trying to rebuild their life.
So, one striking study revealed a prejudice it's deeply disturbing. A white applicant with a criminal record was actually more likely to get a job callback than an equally qualified Black applicant with no criminal record at all. Think about that. Race turned out to be a bigger barrier than an actual criminal history.
As the researcher Dave Pager concluded, this presumption of criminality follows Black men, no matter what their actual history is. In effect, the job market treats them as if they're criminals, even when they have a totally clean record.
This stereotyping and criminalization, it doesn't just cost freedom and opportunity. In the most tragic cases, it costs lives. There is a very real, physical price.
The story of Ahmaud Arbery is just a tragic, real-world example of where this threat stereotype can ultimately lead. I mean, he was out for a run, a simple, everyday activity, when he was chased and killed by men who didn't see a jogger. They saw a threat.
The scholar Ibram X. Kendi reflected on this reality from his own experience just as a runner. He wrote that when some people see him, they don't see a person, they see a stereotype, the embodiment of danger. And that perception turns an ordinary activity into a life-threatening act.
And this physical price, it's not new. Ta-Nehisi Coates frames it as part of a long history of violence enacted upon Black bodies, a history intended, in his words, to break the Black body, the Black family, the Black community.
So finally, let's look at the most intimate cost of the system. The one that isn't paid in courtrooms or on the street, but the one paid inside homes, by families and by children. 1 in 4. Before their 14th birthday, 1 in 4 black children in America will experience a parent, and it's usually their father, being sent to jail or prison. I mean, that is a profound trauma inflicted on an entire generation. The lifelong impact of this separation, it's just so powerfully captured in the work of the writer and poet Daniel Beatty. He tells the story of playing this game with his father, who would knock on his door every single morning, until one morning, the knock just never came.
His poem speaks directly to this huge void that's left behind. The loss of a father, a guide, a teacher, for life's most basic lessons. It's just this call for all the small, irreplaceable moments that were stolen. And that leaves us with this final, echoing question. And it's a question not just about fathers and sons, but about the generational cost of a system that criminalizes black masculinity, and what it truly takes to break that cycle.